Directed, written, starring, produced by Bill Cowell. We are talking The MAIZE from 2004, and that's MAIZE with an I. Now, you may know this as Dark Harvest 2. It was originally made as The MAIZE, but upon release its name was changed to be Dark Harvest 2 to kind of give this a kind of a franchise. There was actually a third Dark Harvest movie as well, which was also not originally produced as a Dark Harvest movie, but they're all kind of like cornfield based horror movies that really have no connection to one another. They're just kind of renamed to be a kind of like somewhat of a you know, a loose franchise. Outside of it being in a kind of a rural setting, cornfields and horror, there is no connection. Now the MAIZE, when it was made, is a very low budget amateur movie, I would suggest. Bill Powell, who actually made this, has got family members actually in the movie, and it's clearly a very, very low budget and somewhat kind of amateur production, and more so than the original Dark Harvest movie by some stretch, I would say. Now, the story focuses on Bill Cowell's character, who is a guy who has psychic abilities. And his spidey senses go off, telling him that his two daughters, who were at the time in a kind of like corn maze in this kind of area, it's Halloween, you know, they're doing this corn maze, and they're kind of in danger. Now, previously there had been a killing, a kind of a killer had killed a couple of girls, and yes, now these two daughters might well be in danger. And Bill Cowell's character, you know, he jets off to the kind of this corn maze to look for his daughters, but he can't find them. He ends up having various altercations with different kind of people in this maze. The police are after him because they think he's kind of being erratic. And there may well be a killer on the loose, as well as some type of ghostly presence. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, this is not well regarded, you might say. And, you know, it's easy to see why. And we'll come on to the negatives, but I'm going to try and talk about some positives first of all. Because this movie is going to be easy to kind of pick on, but I will say this is one of these films where I think, you know, it's made with the kind of the best of intentions. You can kind of tell this was a, you know, an amateur family project that they've kind of made, probably just as a thing to do together. And, you know, it has that sort of family kind of feel is the best way I would kind of describe it. And, you know, there's not a bad idea for a plot, really, this kind of maze where these killings have happened and, you know, mysterious forces are seeming to be colluding to stop his two daughters from leaving this maze until a mystery is solved, so to speak. So, you know, there is a seed of an alright idea here. Execution, a little lacking. We'll talk about it. But, you know, I don't think there is a terrible idea there, to be honest. There is a couple of, like, mildly amusing moments in this movie, I would say. There's a couple of instances where, you know, there's some interactions with characters. I think it kind of, you know, relatively funny. And it's kind of, like, very mildly creepy a couple of times when we have these two ghost girls that turn up and they sort of, like, back off into the darkness and things. Again, for such a low budget amateur production, you know, I'm trying to give credit where I can see at least some attempt here to have these things in place. A little bit of comedy, a little bit of kind of creepiness, you know, a seed of a good idea here. So there is a few things there that I can see. You might have had budget and experienced filmmakers behind this, the end product might have been a little bit more widely received positively, you might say. But as it stands at the moment, it is what it is. It's a very kind of low budget and amateur movie. It legitimately looks like it's been filmed with a handy cam with very little kind of experience. So yeah, so a couple of like, okay, I can see what you're trying to do there. But yeah, but let's talk about maybe what does not work. Okay, this might be a longer list. So yes, it looks like it's been filmed with a a handycam, and that it kind of like has that very amateur feel to it, almost like at times like you're watching someone's vacation video or something. You know, it really just kind of looks like that sort of quality. So yeah, the quality isn't particularly strong. There's elements here that Bill Cowell just hasn't thought about. So let's talk about some of these technical elements. Let's talk about lighting. So these girls get lost in this maze, and it's daytime when it starts, but inevitably it gets darker. They're trapped in this maze overnight. Now this is out in a cornfield. There's no lights. There's no like lamps and stuff. But whenever we follow our characters, it's the camera that they're using to film has clearly got a spotlight on. And that obviously makes it so we can see, but there's no light source in story. It's not like there is these like floodlights that are out and kind of like illuminating this maze, kind of like, or anything like that. You're just having this kind of light from the camera that we are viewing this movie with. And as such, yes, it does illuminate so we can clearly see what the movie is doing. But for the characters actually on screen, it doesn't make sense. There just happens to be this kind of light source which is there. You know, so, you know, this is why you need to think about, okay, how are we going to set up this shot? We need to introduce a light source that is going to be there organically and, you know, in story-wise. And that's how we'll basically illuminate this thing. So you might have had, you know, there might have been kind of like sort of these like street light type things or something like floodlights, that kind of stuff, to illuminate the maze and stuff if it did get dark. But as it stands at the moment, you're relying on the light of the camera, which shouldn't be there because it's not like a found footage movie or anything like that. So just to give you an example of some of the kind of the technical elements that just hasn't been thought about, and because they've used a kind of a low grade, like just commercial camcorder, you know, you've got a few instances where it's kind of like auto focusing and things, and then we've got these kind of like little edits of like for some reason we've got different kind of angles in the same shot. It kind of looks like an old kind of 80s video effect. It's weird, unneeded. So just a general kind of the presentation on a technical level is kind of quite poor here, and it screams, unfortunately, of amateur filmmaking, and they haven't invested in kind of like obviously people with experience to make this movie or equipment to kind of give it more of a professional film. You know, quite frankly, it's surprising this movie got a commercial release, to be honest. It's almost like, I mean, if this was like in the days of YouTube, this probably would have been straight on YouTube as a kind of like, here's my amateur film that I've kind of made, and things like that. So, fair play to this family who have clearly got this movie out as a commercial release, but as a viewer, I feel you may be a little let down with it. Now, the biggest problem with this movie is its pacing. So we get this sort of the kind of almost immediate setup where this character has these psychic visions and he goes running off into the corn maze to try and find his daughter, and then 90% of this movie is this guy looking around this corn maze for, you know, a good hour and a half, with, you know, a couple of interactions with different characters here and there, but that's kind of it. I mean, it's really all of that this movie has going on. We have this set up with the previous murders. Now, if you were to think about this movie a little better, maybe you should have had shown these kind of you get a few kind of like flashbacks and stuff, but, you know, have that kind of that initial act be the setup, be this kind of killer or something like that. Then at least it's a little different, rather than just really we're following this guy for probably close to an hour and a half, just walking around, running around this maze, shouting his daughter's names, and then we sometimes see, you know, his daughters who are just constantly kind of screaming and stuff, or, you know, we may get a couple of interactions with other people, but there's really not a lot to this movie in regards to the plot. So as I say, I think there was an idea here that could have been expanded upon to be an interesting kind of mystery, but it needed to have more going on. You know, the actual kind of like search around the maze should maybe have been like the third act of the movie or something like that. We needed to have a little bit more going on with other characters, and maybe, you know, as I say, the sort of the initial inciting incident with this kind of killer and stuff like that, and researching it, whatever it might be, with other characters. You know, maybe him getting arrested and breaking out of, you know, prison to try and find his daughter. Something along the lines of that. But as it stands at the moment, there's just not enough story here to really warrant a feature-length movie. And this movie is, I think, about an hour and 40 minutes. It does not need to be this long. And again, I've said it many times in these reviews, when you have just one person who is the kind of the creative influence over everything, the producer, the director, they're very unwilling to make cuts because it's their movie that they want to do, and there's no one there to say, you know, this movie is dragging, you need to make this, as it stands at the moment, cut 25 minutes out of it, you know, something like that. So it's a kind of amateur looking movie, and you know, it's not a lot going on, and it drags. Now, the acting isn't great. To be honest, because this is clearly an amateur production, I'll be a little bit forgiving with the acting. I have seen worse, and considering the clear low budget of this film, I think it's somewhat acceptable, to be honest with you. I mean, I watch a lot of B movies, so I see a lot of bad acting, and I have seen worse. But I'm not saying this movie's acting is particularly good or anything like that. It isn't. It isn't great acting. And I think if you were a casual viewer having to watch this, you would probably say, yeah, the acting isn't good. But, you know, in comparison, I think it's not as bad as it could have been. But it's worth kind of mentioning here. I don't think this is going to go down any kind of strong acting here or anything like that. And the refusal really to have any focus on any more than this our one character. We get a few scenes of the wife and the daughters and stuff, but no one's really getting any significant screen time outside of our central kind of character here. There's very little actual kind of horror in this movie, to be honest. And despite what the cover of the Dark Harvest poster might look like, this is not a Scarecrow movie. So the horror is very minimal here. There's not really like any sort of on-screen actual kind of kills or anything like that. We get a person also like dragged off into the cornrows maybe, but that's about as good as you get. As I say, it has a little bit of mild creepiness, but we're talking like family-friendly kind of horror sequences, and they are only kind of probably amount to no more than 30 seconds in the whole movie. So it's not a lot of actual kind of on-screen, you know, genuine horror elements that are actually kind of here. And it's relatively obvious. I mean, the plot that we do have, such as it is, because there isn't a lot of it, is you know, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen. It's not like it's some clever idea here that it's been thought about to make it an intriguing and weaving plot. It's a seed of an idea that is very just kind of like been expanded upon. So it's just a kind of like, I can see why this movie is so low rated, which I think is somewhat of a shame, because I think, you know, as I say, I think there was some things that could have been expanded upon, but we're not talking about what could have been, we are talking about what is. And what is unfortunately, as I say, a quite dull affair which it's just not entertaining at the end of the day. I found my mind wandering because it was such a dreary film, unfortunately. So this one I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. It's pretty low. We'll see what the third one's like, eh? Anyway, 2 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment. I look forward to seeing you next time.